Arc 6, Chapter 63, 5 Obstacles, the Arrival of the Witch Beasts to the Watchtower. Upon Julius' report of the witch beasts of Augria sand dunes making a collective charge inside, Subaru and the rest's cheeks stiffened, and a hue of seriousness dyed everyone's eyes. What they could feel at the soles of their feet were tremors faintly jolting the tower's floor and rumbling upon hearing that they were literally the footsteps and neighs of witch beasts echoing across the tower. It was impossible to not feel unrest. Subaru, though I barely know about this desert aside faintly knowing how humongous it is. Back when he attempted to escape the tower upon being impelled to be suspicious of everything, and the desert's severity which foiled his plan to flee at the first step, was something Subaru hadn't actually experienced. Merely the sight of unending sands spreading as far as the eye could see was difficult to forget, so he was able to make suitable imaginations. Regardless, it was also hard to imagine that the desert was overflowing with living organisms. Julius. Augria sand dunes is a place where witch beasts live en masse, you see, such that the witch beasts targeting any human that may enter the sands is a bigger issue than the severity of the environment. Echidna, formerly, there was a military contingent dispatched with the plan to annihilate the witch beasts, though the result of that should be obvious from the sound of these footsteps. Julius and Echidna gave their respective responses to Subaru's question. In other words, Subaru's hope of the rumbling earth being naught but mere paper tigers, and that the number of enemies coming was at best at the level of a zoo, had been an immense miscalculation. To be precise, it was rather at the level of an entire savanna of witch beasts. Understandably enough, it was sufficient to make one despair. However, Meili, so you realized that you should call me. Raising her voice, said Meili whilst fiddling with her braid. The only one to not show any signs of anxiety upon the report of the witch beast's arrival was her, though her reaction did not intend to imply that this wasn't an abnormality. Her reaction was the kind that she didn't perceive the witch beasts to be a threat. Julius, although it is quite pathetic, it's just as you say, I want to borrow your strength. Cheeks stiff, Julius nodded in response to Meili's question, leaving the witch beasts charging in great numbers up to Meili, who possessed the ability to command witch beasts. Julius' idea was understandable. The first thing Subaru came up with had also been this. However, a queer sensation caused the alarm bell to ring depths of Subaru's chest. Beatrice, Subaru, what happened, I suppose? That's a somewhat strange face, in fact. Subaru, having a strange face has been my destiny ever since I was born. Beatrice, that goes just for your eyes, I suppose. Immediately beside him, Beatrice noticed his bitter expression and looked at him in concern. He sighed a large amount of carbon dioxide out, along with something shapeless like unease. That was indeed something ambiguous and vague, with no tinge of concreteness. Julius, Subaru, are you concerned about something? Subaru, don't come at me asking questions one after another. That being said, I guess it's my fault for making a face that give that impression. On top of apologizing for it, I have something else to say. An exclusive scoop I picked up from the Book of the Dead. Beatrice halted her breath and widened her eyes, having already heard those words. In all honesty, the reaction could be anticipated, but he couldn't explain without stating it. The reason behind the sudden change in situation, why the witch beasts were charging towards the tower in such great numbers, Subaru. It's gluttony. The gluttony sin archbishop is sending the witch beasts to the tower. Julius. Hick, why? Subaru, I'll have to apologize for that. I met one of gluttony in Reed's Book of the Dead. To be exact, I reunited with one of gluttony. It seems I met last night as well. That is, Julius, the reason behind your loss of memories is what it means, huh? Subaru nodded in response to Julius' immediate arrival at the conclusion. Though difficult to say it was as per expectations, Julius' ability to understand was immense. Associating the name and power of gluttony, using that knowledge, he immediately reached the desired conclusion. Julius, I cannot say I'm not unsettled. I ask again, did you truly not get anything stolen away from you this time? Subaru, fortunately, aside from my whole life being stalked and shared, I'm still complete, though I just explained all that to Beatrice and the others. Julius, I see, Beatrice-sama, Beatrice. Betty is also anxious about what you fear, in fact. For the time being, no abnormalities were present, I suppose. Subaru. You really can't trust me, can you? With a convinced expression, Julius immediately turned to Beatrice for confirmation. Though Subaru understood that it was a matter beyond helping, he still found himself at a complex state of mind. Regardless, Subaru. It seems like, due to the incident last night, the enemy grasped that we are over here. After about half a day. They've come here to meddle along with their pets. Is that what this means, huh? Echidna, considering the normal speed of traveling, arriving at this tower in half a day is hard to conceive, especially considering the obstacles which beasts pose as during the course of the journey. However, Echidna, unlike the difficult journey we had, if gluttony holds the power to make the witch beasts abide command, then the issue would be merely the speed of traveling. Subaru crossed his arms with a strained expression upon Echidna's comment, whilst she shrugged her shoulders. Gluttony possessed the power to make the witch beasts abide command. It would be appropriate to assume that as minimum. At the very least, there was no room of doubt in that the witch beasts were advancing towards the tower due to the enemy's direction. It should be kept in mind that they possessed such means as well. Subaru. What about the issue of the speed of traveling? Echidna. The vast sandy terrain. Even if the witch beasts were to not pose as an obstruction, the speed is bound to fall should one tread through sand. I would like to believe that it would still take a couple of days, even if the path taken is straight to the tower, and one never gets lost. Subaru, but are there any other possibilities? Echidna. It would be a totally different story if an aerial route is used in case the overland route will cost time. Subaru. Aerial route? Subaru openly expressed his astonishment with his black eyes widened upon the presentation of the unforeseen possibility. An aerial route, if that was a feasible way, then it would certainly reduce travel time drastically. A flying bird is faster than a walking man. That is how it usually goes. Subaru. Due to my arbitrary preconceptions, I thought means of flying would be an exception. Magic exists anyway, so something like flying in the sky is pretty normal, huh? Beatrice, that is not the case, I suppose. Flying is a complex variety of magic. Its procedure is very complicated, in fact. Considering the danger of crashing, normally nobody would be willing to take the risk and do it, I suppose. The one who would do it would either be an idiot or a genius, or otherwise an idiotic genius, in fact. Julius. Though it was commonly said that Margrave Mathers makes attendance to the royal castle through the skies, Beatrice. That would be the idiotic genius, I suppose. It seemed that Beatrice didn't particularly like this Margrave, whom he hadn't met. Whilst looking at the cutely pouting Beatrice, Subaru tilted his head upon being told that flying magic wasn't usual. Subaru, if it's not magic then, a huge bird? Ah, a dragon. They must have ridden on some flying dragon's back or something. Echidna. In fact, the technique of taming flying dragons has been established as a secret in the Valatian Empire to the south. Though the Empire has full monopoly on that technique, with the evil techniques of gluttony, then simply usurping it would be simple. Subaru. They could just get it by someone who knew that technique. By taking away their memories, with a lick, huh? Should that be considered, the enemy owned far too powerful methods when it came to intelligence. By eating the memories, everything regarding what was intended to remain secret could become one's own, and by eating the name, that very happening, as a matter of fact, along with the opponent's entire existence could be written off. It is often said that memories are what shape people. Subaru thought that a person's path, is etched into memories and history. Possessing the sense of values where he especially thought so right now, Subaru truly despised the power of the foul-playing gluttony from the very bottom of his heart. Ruin some. Gluttony's power of plundering the memories of others was evil that blasphemed against everything and brought ruin. To use it for one's own joyfulness, for one's own pursuit of happiness, was absurd. With mistaken methods, illogical ways, distorting and twisting fate. Well, is Oni-san, who uses return by death, going to be saying that? Subaru. Hick. Beatrice. Subaru. Beatrice called out to Subaru, who subconsciously bit his lip with force. Feeling his arm being pulled, his line of sight and her deep blue eyes then intersected. He could feel a sharp ache at the edge of his mouth, and it was pathetic that this painful wound had been inflicted by his own bite. Licking the blood exiting the wound with his tongue, Subaru lowered his head, saying, "Sorry." Subaru, for a moment, her ridiculing face came up in my head, you see. Making that thing have a thoroughly tearful and sorry face is one of the biggest goals, but the problem which comes first are that thing's big brothers. Julius. It is already known that there are multiple sin archbishops of gluttony, but did you grasp something? Subaru. It's really confusing cause of the incomprehensible first person, but probably. There's one rolled up in the Book of the Dead, and that one has two big brothers, I think. In the Hall of Memories, Louis had frequently mentioned the bynames Oni-chan and Nick-sama. If that was to be taken at face value, then it would mean that Louis had two elder brothers. Whether that were to be exactly taken as proof of gluttony being three siblings was a separate issue, Subaru. At the very least, she was not the type who'd use such a tactic. Not that I, who slightly lost to the force of her personality, can say that. What would have had happened had he gone as per the enemy's plan and strangled that slender neck? If it wasn't for the voice of the young girl of blue hair that had appeared then by now he would have surely. Meili, so what does Oni-san want to sawai? Making stopovers here and there and beating around the bush is Oni-san's bad habit, Ria Ellie. Seemingly interrupting her drowsiness, Meili jolted her body and made a dissatisfied expression. The young girl, who was supposed to have already gotten her role assigned to her since the beginning, seemed to be incredibly discontent due to being made to wait as is. Comprehending her displeasure, Subaru said, "I know," and commanded with his hand. "Subaru, I understand how you feel, but this is the minimum necessary conversation. Beating around the bush is certainly my bad habit, but think of it as a part of my charm and be charmed." Meili, do you want to get chewed yupi? Subaru, sorry, it's just that a ton of witch beasts have come. Then let's request Professor Meili, who is an expert in witch beasts. That kind of a flow is normal, right? I must have said. The enemies are the ones who stole my memories. Meili, that me NS. Meili lowered her tone once again, seeing Subaru speak cautiously. The true meaning of what Subaru wanted to convey had been conveyed to her as well, and the same went for his comrades around them, who had changed their expressions. Taking an extensive view of the faces of his party members, Subaru resumed whilst scratching his head. Subaru, I'll introduce by saying it's my fault, okay? But they have my memories. They will lay traps knowing the strengths of our lineup. We will have to beat them at their own game. The scene changes. The one who controls intelligence controls the battle. Natsuki Subaru, who had grown up in modern-day Japan, poisoned by various game cultures, recognized that this saying was a formula of victory in modern-day warfare. Even if that were not the case, victory in a game of poker in which the opponent has already seen one's hand was impossible, a logic obvious to even children. Henceforth, Julius, if the opponent has seen our war potential, then I shall agree with your concern. Whilst leading the way, Julius narrowed his eyes and conveyed merely the caution in his words behind. He shared the cognizance that it was dangerous to not know the opponent's move, as well as explaining the situation only briefly. Regardless, the thought of the balance being destroyed on top of not knowing the opponent's move did not prevent him from keeping his head raised. Beatrice. Keeping important information a secret, and it being found out later is much more scary, in fact. Subaru's current idea is correct, I suppose. Subaru, really, it's all right, you all don't hate me. Beatrice, why are you so uneasy, in fact? It's all right, I suppose. Nobody hates Subaru, in fact. Rather, everyone lie. Subaru, I get it. It's all right, I'm relieved, I love you. Whilst holding hands and walking side by side, Subaru nodded at Beatrice as she tried to somehow encourage him. In fact, the speaker got far more embarrassed than the listener. Words of love are much lighter on the one telling than the one being told. There is no need to doubt one's own feelings. Subaru, so where's Shala? Julius, just a bit more over there. Dashing in front of everyone, Julius pointed towards a stone passage. Though the passage appeared to be a dead end, a hidden sideway path was present on the right. Lowering his hips, Julius passed under the wall and his body then arrived outside of the tower. welcomed by vehement winds filled with sand and sounds impossible to get accustomed to. That sounded like an innumerable amount of glass shattering on Subaru's ear all at once. Stranger. Ah, hia 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 ya hia 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 hia. That place was a space like a balcony installed on the wall of the tower, though it was something he knew thanks to the enormous spiral staircase connecting to the lower floors. But the fourth layer existed at a height far above several hundreds of meters. Amidst the parched winds, dancing about in the lofty balcony was a stylish beauty with a long, lustrous braid Subaru. Shala, Shala. Ah, Master Sama, you've come here. I'm so happy. My world stage, it feels like a workplace inspection. Since my esteemed master has come for inspection, take a good look and feast your eyes. Shala replied to Subaru's shout with a dazzling voice, whilst he covered his eyes with his arm to protect them from the sand. What she did with the same energy was a fantasy difficult to believe in its own way. For about the balcony's width, countless gunports had been deployed horizontally that had been generated in the air. Gunports would be a slight bit of exaggeration, but there were no other words befitting it that he could think of. Gunports, muzzles, shooting portals in any case, they were openings for firing something for sure. The white, great gunports, which had been deployed through forming something akin to a magic square in the air, their aims were tilted diagonally towards the ground. And Shala, Infinity Hell's snipe, Subaru, that's so cool. Upon Shala's casting shout, the white gunports glimmered brilliantly. The sound of shattering glass then repeatedly echoed through the sky of the sands, crushing Subaru's howl. At the same time, the gunports lost their form and dissolved into the atmosphere. This was the true identity of the high-pitched sound that had welcomed Subaru and the others upon their arrival at the balcony earlier. And there was only one reason why Shala was utilizing them. Firing bombardments as much as possible, the Coronas approached the ground with speed that seemed as light. Upon making impact on the sand, they released a violent luster and blew away the ground. The same impact was also placed on the backs of the savagely rushing witch beasts atop the sand. The witch beasts, which were aiming for the tower and gave rise to a plume of sand, received the coronas on their backs, their blood and flesh scattering across the sand subsequently. The thirsting sand sipped their flesh. The scattered corpses were trampled by the other witch beasts. The corona's carpet bombing heartily and unmistakably reduced the total number of the approaching witch beasts. The number of coronas was close to 100, and each aimed for and struck down 2 or 3 witch beasts. This was what Shala had fired in rapid succession within a short period of time. Also considering the interval when Julius went to call Subaru and the others, just how high a number would be the total shots fired by her. However, against the horde of witch beasts which submerged the environs of the tower like an army of ants, even Shala's carpet bombardment only provided resistance eventually bound to fall short. That was how large an obstacle were the numbers of the witch beasts gathering from the sands. Subaru. Hey, hey, hey. I don't really want to hear about it, but could it be? Echidna, from this footing, only a single direction from the tower is visible. However, the same scenery also spreads on the other side of the tower as well. That chain of thought is not wrong. Subaru. It's also possible that just this side of the tower has been painted with luring sugared water, you know. Beatrice. If there's someone who actually did such an idiotic antic, then Betty will slap them with full force, I suppose. Unending tremors and wriggling black lumps underneath. Hearing that they were approaching the tower from all directions, Subaru got on the verge of collapsing due to this overwhelming reality. Digressing, he also wanted to object to the appearance of the witch beasts visible from afar. Far too grotesque, ominous, inexplicable, a C-grade design by God. Shala, what do you think, Master Sama? Did you see my great service? Also, that angle from behind was an appeal for Master Sama. What did you think about that as well? Subaru. You, such an unwavering nature even in this situation. It's amazing. I ordinarily admire it. Since you seem the type on whom complimenting the process instead of the result works better, well, what can I say? It was totally great. Nice bulk. Also, no matter which angle you decide on, I don't have the leeway to be looking around, so keep concentrating and let's go. Shala. Okay, Google defense, offense. The truth was, he bowed before Shala's unwavering spirit. Whilst throwing words rather iffy for being encouragement, he also felt guilty seeing Shala respond gallantly. He wanted to reward her once this battle ends safely, but Subaru. First comes overcoming this place, that's top priority. Meili, I know no need to shout like that, but Subaru, but what? But would you be fine if I fully annihilated the witch bee SDS? Is that what you mean to say? It's completely fine, rather, I request you. Meili, don't have such cocky expectations, Oka why. Even I won't be able to cope with many bad animal chans. Meili looked down from the balcony with both her hands clenching her ears with a sullen expression. Alongside, she ignored Subaru's irrational hopes and touched her lovable, young side profile. And licking her somewhat glossy lips, Meili. That's why I'll make the children I had prepared move and strike them ha-RD. Haran. With that declaration, Meili pointed her hand towards the ground, and simultaneously, a huge mass jumped up, seeming as if the sand dunes had exploded. From a point quite distant such that even the enormous witch beasts appeared to be tiny specks, the existence which had broken through the ground was clearly visible. In other words, it meant that it was an appropriately gigantic existence. With the overall size of about 20 or 30 meters, a gigantic earthworm appeared and crushed the surrounding witch beasts with its frame. Subaru. That one is, Meili. I figured that it may be needed, so I kept tamed and prepared. To be honest, I was intending to silently run away, but running away in this kind of a place would be a fie lure. With the gigantic earthworm before their eyes, Meili showed her tongue whilst Subaru inhaled. Unfortunately, Subaru's astonishment was not directed towards the earthworm itself, but to the fact that he had memories of that earthworm. That was the witch beast which Subaru had encountered once when he had tried to escape from the tower. Thinking back to it, Subaru had also been victim to the earthworm, which jumped out altogether from the underground. What was also in the nook of his memories was that the earthworm had been blasted away by a white luster. So Meili had been behind the earthworm, and Shala had been behind the luster. Tasting surprise and startlement upon the delayed convincement, Subaru, with a bitter expression, caressed her head with his hand and patted it rather forcefully, which she was unable to dodge for how sudden it was. Meili, why, Subaru. I don't know if it's just your nature or your habit, but you don't have to act villainous. I'll never believe that you tried to run away, leaving us all behind anyways. Meili. MGH, how can you say something like thati? Subaru. That's 'cause I am you and you are me. Everyone's different and everyone's nice, probably. Meili. Huh. Meili stood with an expression of failing to comprehend, and neither did Subaru intend to make her understand. Ultimately, Subaru, at the present stage, was able to see through all of the deceit in Meili's words, for he had once inspected and read through the memories of her dead self as something which was his own. Considering herself who was in the tower while she didn't have a change in her sense of values at the very least, he could surely speak to her like he understood her. And while keeping his hand on Meili's head, who groaned in displeasure, Subaru directed his consciousness towards the outbreaking situation at the present point in time and the commonness of the happenings in the former loops. The witch beasts advancing in great numbers perhaps coincided with the situation of burning centaurs inside the tower, whose invasion had been permitted last time. In other words, the incident of the witch beasts being allowed to invade the tower itself had also happened last time. It had been Julius who put up a fierce fight in order to drive them out. In that case, had Shala been dealing with the witch beasts from the exterior of the tower like this time? And since she was unable to suffice, the result was the witch beasts' invasion being permitted. However, the same shall not happen this time. They now had an advantage at their side, which made a huge difference compared to last time when it came to this large horde of witch beasts. That was the existence of Meili, the very girl who had lost her life unintentionally at the hands of Subaru last time, was the existence who possessed the key to open through the deadlock of this situation. Subaru. If Meili fights the witch beasts alongside Shala, then the situation will change. Does that mean Julius' hands will be open? If that's so, then... It would be possible to use the war potential named Julius to deal with a separate problem. The instant that thought dawned upon Subaru, he understood that it was essential to direct various people to needed deployments for dealing with the various problems that have repeatedly occurred in this tower. The large horde of witch beasts covering the sand dunes. The Sin Archbishop of Gluttony, who will launch an attack on the tower. The titanic scorpion which will wander around the tower with an expression as if it owns the place. The colossal black shadow which will swallow not only the tower, but the sand dunes as well. And Redistria, who will eventually start freely walking around the tower. Subaru. Our war potential would be me and Beatrice, Emilia Chan and Ram, Meili with Shala, and Echidna with Julius. Echidna, additionally, 2 ground dragons and the healing spirit of the green room, how about counting them too? It will only be an advantage to think of them as choices, I believe. Echidna shrugged her shoulders before Subaru, who was counting the strength of their side and the enemies. Nodding in response to her words, Subaru decided to include Patrash and the large healing spirit of the lower layer to the cards in their hand. Just as Echidna had said, it was not a situation in which they could afford to keep any hands free. Subaru tilted his head. Since the inclusion of all available cards was necessary, it was also necessary to fulfill their conditions for victory. Even in that sense, he wanted to have a grasp on all of his comrades' positions such that he could reach them. Subaru, hey, wait a second. No matter what, this is way too late, isn't it? Subaru. Emilia Chan and Ram went to the green room just to see Rem and the others, right? Subaru tasted the sensation of having his throat parched upon the delay in uniting with the 2 female comrades who were not here. The green room was on the 4th layer, the same layer Subaru and the others were on. The possibility of them not knowing about this place and going astray in the rest of the tower was also probable, but Julius, it's this situation. If they don't know our location, then Miss Ram would surely use some way and find us. In fact, Emilia Sama is supposed to have broken the wall and shown herself. Subaru, Ram aside, the hell is with your evaluation of Emilia Chan? There's no way she'd break a wall with those adorable, slender arms of hers. Even if she does, she doesn't have that kind of a personality, right? Beatrice. Loss of confidence is good proof, in fact, but Betty also has a bad feeling about this, I suppose. Subaru. Hick, Shala, Meili, can I leave this place to you? Gaining Julius and Beatrice's approval, Subaru called out to Shala and Meili. Upon hearing that, Shala, who was busy piling up the deployment and firing of even more gunports of light, smoothened up, and Meili brushed away her braid and puffed her chest. Shala, leave this place to me and go on ahead. Meili, if this keeps up, I'll do whatever I ca and I won't let it pass by if you don't come back with one san and the others all saw fee. With Shala saying the line he's always wanted to say at the best possible moment and discovering a side of Meili which allowed them to rely upon her, Subaru nodded towards Beatrice and the rest, subsequently sprinting. Diving through the wall, he slid onto the aisle, Subaru. Even though Meili and Shala are holding out, what's the possibility of the witch beasts penetrating into the tower? Echidna, it's not as if it's not possible, but the underground sand chamber we fell into. Right, Natsuki-kun does not remember it. There was the possibility of entering the tower from there, but thanks to Meili-kun, that is. Subaru. When the earthworm was raging about, the underground collapsed. Echidna. The subterranean tunnel had so many fork roads. I doubt it would have managed to withstand it in terms of strength. Subaru clenched his fists upon Echidna's affirmation. In other words, the doubly beneficial existence of Meili had held the witch beasts' stampede back. It was possible to have plenty of defense to ensure they didn't enter either from the ground or the underground. If the large horde of witch beasts had been dealt with, then that would largely leave 4 more problems. Even though they were a sufficient matter of concern, there was still one left, one which must be overcome with certainty. After overcoming those 5 perilous paths, Subaru, by us, this tower must be captured, immediately subsequent to him having that word on the tip of his tongue. Stranger, Barusu, Subaru, hick, it's Ram. Dashing towards the green room, he raised his face towards the voice which had reached the other side of the aisle. Upon observing, rushing fiercely towards the 4 composed of Subaru, and the other's was a black shadow. It was Patrash. The ground dragon with sharp looks, clinging onto its back, was Ram, who had the sleeping Rem's body tightly embraced in her slender arms. Subaru. Ram, along with Patrash and Rem, are you all right? Ram. Yes, somehow, you see. Ram had a mountain of problems, and the time Barusu was dozing off. How can you even sleep in this situation? Kindly stand up immediately. Subaru. I'm sorry. Both of you sisters, don't reproach me. Look, I'm properly standing. I'm running. Nimbly dismounting from the ground dragon's back, with Rem still on the saddle, Ram's cutting eloquence struck him. Since her words happened to be similar to those of Rem's when she had gone off like an explosion in his dream, a queer thought appeared in his mind that they were sisters not just by looks. Ram, while Barusu's odd attitude is concerning, now is not the time for that. Upon hearing Subaru's words, Ram briefly furrowed her eyebrows, but immediately turned her head back and diverted her attention towards the rear. That was the aisle. She just came from the direction in which the green room was. Subaru also felt uneasy about Ram having brought only Patrash and Rem with her, and not Emilia, who was supposed to be with her. Subaru, I also have things I have to ask about and tell you about. You were supposed to be with Ram. On the other side of the aisle, Ram came across the opponent who named himself the Sin Archbishop of Gluttony. Declared Ram with absolute clarity, slashing down his question. Daunted by the strength of those words, Subaru, along with Beatrice and Julius, sealed their mouths tight. Thus the one to respond in their stead was Echidna, who had been disturbed the least. Echidna, you just said the Sin Archbishop of Gluttony, right? That on the other side of the aisle. Ram, yes, that's right. And someone is battling that Sin Archbishop of Gluttony. Subaru, someone. An explanation exceedingly unusual in impression. Ram's words did not change, brimming with ambition and confidence, and the existence of unintelligible portions itself yielded a terribly far-reaching unease. When Subaru pressed those unintelligible portions, Ram nodded with a yes. She nodded and said, Ram, an unknown person of silver hair is clashing with the Sin Archbishop of Gluttony, even right now, after telling Ram and the others to escape.